We turn now to the Republican primary and our continuing coverage of the race for City Hall. And earlier today, Dominic spoke with George McDonald, who is hoping to capture the Republican nomination. Dominic?
Well, Andrew, he may not have the name recognition of some of the other candidates, but George McDonald began feeding the homeless of New York some 30 years ago in Grand Central Station. And today he runs a life skills jobs counseling program. In other words, a second chance program that has been effective. And now McDonald wants to be the mayor of the Big Apple. The Republican primary, believe it or not, is, as you well know, is now less than a month away, a race really based on the polling between frontrunner Joe Lhota and the very wealthy John Catsimatidis. Can you win this thing?
Well, Dominic, I don't want to get into the weeds of it, but, you know, I've been scoring in double digits in the polls, and these polls, they measure 100 people, 120 people. So, you know, I'm within the margin of error of Catsimatidis. So I don't know how anybody can project who's the front runner or who is going to win based on these polls. I know that the media likes to declare the winner long before the election is held.
You mentioned stop and frisk, in which you disagree. You released a statement with the actions taken by the city council, in which you refer to in your statement as Dante, the son, that is, of candidate Bill de Blasio. Here's my question. Do you think de Blasio is using his family like a cheap photo op for political gain? Or perhaps more importantly, is it working for Bill de Blasio?
Well, you know, whether or not he's using his family is not a question that I'm comfortable answering. I suggested that his son, my grandchildren, and everybody's children are going to be less safe in New York City because the police are going to be demoralized. There's a judge, there's a monitor, there's a independent oversight by the city council, the bill that they passed. And Dominic, when I started the Doe Fund 25 years ago, the courts got involved with the homeless policy. And you know that the courts have been supervising the homeless policy in New York City for the past 30 years. And look what that's gotten us. Now we're going to have the courts and unelected people supervising the police. And that's just wrong-headed. We have to do things constitutionally, and we have to move to the community police base. But we have to provide economic opportunity for people, because if people don't work, we have disconnected youth between 16 and 24 years old, Dominic. And there are hundreds of thousands of them in the city of New York. Their fathers have criminal records, and they have a difficult time getting jobs. And the kids have difficult time getting jobs. We have to change that. What's the root causes of crime in these high crime areas? It boggles my mind that anybody could come at this from any other way than these communities have been neglected for so long that we need to have an economic investment into these communities to show them that we care about them.
You know, Mr. McDonald, I have to admit, it is a bit odd to hear a Republican candidate talking about African-American men in terms of those that have been incarcerated and giving them opportunity. You've had a lifetime, your career, of doing exactly that. I'm short on time, so let me move on. I want to know, between me and you here, what happened between you and Anthony Weiner? He called you grandpa after you told him don't ever put his hand on you again. What happened?
Well, we had a conversation, you know, a forum out in Queens, and I said that I believe that a person's character and judgment were as important in the consideration of the voters as their ideas. Weiner took exception to that. At the AARP event, he came up from behind me and slapped me in the chest a couple times, and I didn't like it. So I told him just to keep his hands to himself, and then he said, "Oh, you're a tough guy now." And I said, "I am tough, but keep your hands to yourself." And he said, "What are you going to do about it, Grandpa?" And, you know, I thought that that was a pretty ridiculous forum to be calling me divisively. or derogatorily grandpa. But, this isn't about Anthony Weiner. And Dominic, just let me finish up with the point before. It doesn't matter whether I'm a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. The mass incarceration of African American men in America has caused the breakdown of family structure and has put us in this position where we have all of these folks that have barriers to employment, and we need to overcome that. If you go into these high crime areas, you're going to find African American men, 50% of them, that have criminal records and can't get a job. I want to change that, and I will. On the day one of my administration, we'll start putting people to work.
McDonald faces an uphill battle. Now, if you're like me at home, you may have been scratching your head saying, wait a minute, this guy is a Republican, but boy, does he sound like a Democrat. Well, guess what? George McDonald is a longtime Democrat who sought his party's nomination for Congress in the 1980s. Mr. McDonald recently registered as a Republican, thinking it would be an easier path to City Hall. Maybe, maybe not. Andrew?
Compassionate policing, economic opportunity, class divisions. He's gotten like an asterisk in the polls so far. Is there any path for George McDonald?
Well, there's always hope. But he does raise a very legitimate point, though, as far as the polling. He hasn't done well in the polling, but he points out that the survey sample is only of about, and this is right up your alley, only about 100 people on the Republican side. Why even waste your time polling if you're going to do 100 people? Because the sample is simply not large enough.
Though, Rich, you could argue if there was any part of the country where a moderate or even a left-leaning Republican might have a chance, it would be New York City, New Jersey, our area.
You could argue that, but I don't know that you would want to run that far to the left in the Republican primary. I think he's really shooting himself in the foot here with all of the old school Republican guard that are going to look at him and confuse him with everybody on the Democrat ticket.
There's left-leaning, and then there's running as Karl Marx. In the Republican primary, he almost had me changing my voter registration. So.
All right, let's do the strategy session on the other two Republicans. Joe Lhota has been polling consistently well. So the question is, does he play it safe? Does he sort of lay low between now and primary day, or does he have to aggressively go after this thing, Rich?
I think Lhota's just got to stay out there and stay on message and do what he's got to do to just stay in the lead so that he could come out swinging come primary.
Dom, do you get the sense that there's enthusiasm for Joe Lhota among Republicans, or is it just he seems to be the best positioned and maybe the guy who might fare the best chance in November?
Well, remember, he had a successful track of running the MTA, was successful as Rudy Giuliani's, one of Rudy's top deputy mayors, though that may be a liability in the fall campaign. We will see. If you're Joe Lhota, you want to run out the clock. You want to pray that Cassimatidis doesn't do a kamikaze campaign with all of his money in the final days, which could hurt you. And if you're Joe Lhota, you're sitting back, you don't want to face Bill Thompson. That's the unknown quantity. What you do want is you want to sit back if you're Joe Lhota and you say, just like I said earlier, Bill de Blasio, please, please, please. You're going, if you're Lhota, you're going, please, please, please. Nasty runoff. Fernando Ferrer, Mark Green, do it again. That's how Bloomberg became mayor, and that's how Joe Lhota could very well be the next mayor of New York City. If the Democrats in the runoff, let's say it's Thompson and de Blasio, and those two go after each other racially, it's over for the Democrats.
Rich, how does a Lhota, I mean, Catsimatidis could put as much money as he wants into this race. He's got signage now on the Staten Island ferry, and so as you're waiting for the ferry, it's in Staten Island's a Republican hub. How do you compete against all that money if Catsimatidis decides to break the bank on this?
Well, contrary to popular belief, I think when you're in a race, message is oftentimes just as important as money. And just a page from my playbook, Christie was outspent 10-1 in his race in '09 and was able to beat Corzine. Yes, the landscape was different and it was a general, but what I'm going to say is I think Katzimatidis is already putting out the attack ads. On my way up here, I heard one, Katzimatidis painting Loda as a bureaucrat. And I think he just needs to stay the course with his message and not get into a bloodbath with Katzimatidis so that he can make it through to the finish line.
You mentioned the issues. Is there really that much daylight in the issues between Loda and Katzimatidis? Is there that much that separates them, or are they closely aligned on position enough that it becomes a popularity thing?
I think on position they're not too far off, but the real difference is that Deputy Mayor Loda brings a different pedigree to the table. One is a businessman, one is a successful public servant. And I think that's what the Republican primary voters are going to choose between.
I couldn't agree more, and that's one of the questions that we asked Katzimatidis. The fact of the matter is, Joe Loda has already run the city of New York. When Rudy Giuliani was out there flirting in Arkansas, running for the Senate against Hillary Clinton, and then all the other stuff, who was running the city? Joe Loda was. So he's actually run New York City. The question on Loda, does he have the public side, the personality? And Katzimatidis, when we asked him that question, he said, listen, Loda's qualified to be controller. I don't know about mayor. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
Dominic, you mentioned Katzimatidis' wealth, or the funds that he can tap into, the grocery store magnate whose wealth is estimated at about $3 billion. So he's got the resources. He could fire away if he wants to, and how much of that he wants to spend is up to him. He's got to go on the attack, right? He's got to be playing offense, and I mean big time offense in the next 2.5 weeks, right?
It's do or die. It's either you do it now, and he's within striking distance. Again, the polling on the Republican side may be off, but this guy is so wealthy, and this is the point that I've made, and President Clinton has confirmed this. When President Clinton makes his trips to Africa, on many of those trips, it's Katzimatidis 727. Notice I didn't say small plane.
Right.
I said 727. It's Katzimatidis' plane that President Clinton borrows to make those trips. This guy owns supermarkets, real estate, you name it. He's done it. He's got it. He's got the resources. The question is he going to fight hard? And will Loda be able to sustain those hits?
And that means it's got to be negative, right? If he's gonna make a big buy and really try to make a run at this thing, he's got to attack Loda hard.
Well, that seems to be the direction that he's taking. However, that could blow up in his face, and it could backfire, and come primary day, people could say, you know what, the negative campaigning, I'm tired of it. Loda has stayed the course. He's stayed on message. He's run the city. He has a track record as a public servant. I'm going to go with him. It could go either way. And
Scott, quickly, we've heard Republicans throughout the Democratic primary say, circular firing squad, let them all go at each other. This could set up nicely for whoever the Democrats are. I mean, the Democrats are going to have to get through a runoff, but if the Republican primary gets really negative, that could be helpful for the Democrats laying away.
I mean, it has nowhere near the attention that the Democratic primary is soaking up in the own media. That's not likely that whatever happens between the front runners on the R side, that they're going to do the kind of damage that the Democrats traditionally do to each other.
But I'm curious, if you were doing Katzimatidis, how would you handle this with the
if I
final
was doing
days?
Katzimatidis, I would have remade Gristedes before he launched his campaign, because to some people, the way that brand looks reflects on the guy who's running it.
But what would you do now with the final days of the campaign?
I think he's got to go all in negative against Loda.
With what message, though?
Well, the message is, I'm a businessman. I've been able to run a business. Bloomberg showed what a businessman could do for the city. You don't need a lifetime public servant. They're the people who mess things up.
And the MTA, too. I would think he might be open on the MTA. It's how much more are you paying for a subway ride today? How much were you paying before Joe Loda was the...
That was the message on the ad that I heard. He beat him up for being a bureaucrat and for abuses at the MTA.
All right, we're going to take a break here on RFL. Up next, a Democratic insider says President Obama has no plans to hit the trail for Democratic gubernatorial candidate Barbara Buono in New Jersey. But should he? Should he be inserting himself into this David and Goliath style race? A lot of people with eyes towards 2016 might hope that he does. We're going to get into that and some other stories next. Stay with us.